A client walks into my law office. She sits down, shaking, and says, "My husband's been lying to me." I nod, staying calm. Until she shows me a photo. My chest tightens. My pen stops. Because the man in that picture is my husband. And that's when I realized. That's the part one keep coming back to. Not the photo. Not the betrayal. Not even the way my whole body went cold when I recognized him. It was the fact that I didn't react at all. I just looked at the screen, took one slow breath, and asked, "Do you have more?" Melissa Wilson was sitting across from me in my office in El Paso, clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She looked like she was trying not to fall apart in front of a stranger. I'd seen that look before. Family law does that to people. They walk in thinking they're here for answers, then realize saying everything out loud makes it real. She kept apologizing for being nervous. For talking too fast. For not knowing what mattered and what didn't. I told her to take her time. Then she unlocked her phone again and started showing me everything that had already blown my marriage apart before she even knew my last name. Photos. Messages. Hotel confirmations. Screenshots of late-night calls. Dates lined up with the nights Robert told me he had work dinners, client meetings, last-minute property tours, all the usual excuses that sound harmless until they don't. And there he was in every piece of it. Robert Smith. My husband. My problem. My client's husband too, apparently. Same smile. Same watch. Same navy button-down he wore when he wanted to look polished without trying too hard. I knew his habits so well that every image felt like a personal insult. I recognized clothes I'd bought him. Restaurants I'd suggested. A hotel 20 minutes from our house that he once claimed he'd never even heard of. Melissa was talking, but for a few seconds, her voice sounded far away. I was staring at one message where he'd written, "Can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you already." That message had been sent on a Thursday. I remembered that Thursday. I had eaten leftover takeout alone at the kitchen island while he texted me that he was stuck entertaining an investor from Phoenix. I remember because I'd almost told him I was feeling sick that night. I remember because he came home after midnight smelling like cologne that wasn't his. I remember because when I asked if everything went well, he kissed my forehead and said, "Long night." I'm exhausted. And I had believed him. Melissa looked up at me and asked, "Is this enough to do something with?" I should have said no. I should have told her to leave. I should have found some reason to refer her to another attorney before I crossed a line I could never uncross. Instead, I said, "Yes. This is enough to start." She exhaled so hard it almost sounded like a sob. That moment changed everything and I knew it. Still, I kept going. That's probably the part people would judge me for if I posted this online, and, honestly, maybe they should. Because once I knew the truth, every choice after that was deliberate. Melissa told me they'd been married a little over 5 years. No kids. No shared property beyond a condo and a few accounts. She said things had started feeling wrong months earlier. Robert had become protective of his phone. He was suddenly working later. Some weekends he'd disappear for showings that somehow never led to commissions. She said she'd tried to convince herself she was being paranoid until she saw a text preview light up while he was in the shower. I didn't tell her that wasn't paranoia. That was pattern. I didn't tell her I knew exactly how he smiled when he lied. I didn't tell her I had spent the last 8 years sleeping beside that man. I just asked questions. Calm, direct, professional. When did she first get suspicious? Did she have access to joint accounts? Did she know whether he'd spent marital funds on the affair? Had he ever made promises about leaving his wife? That last question made her blink. She frowned and said, "His wife." I held her gaze for half a second too long, then looked back down at my notes. That was the first moment I realized she didn't know. Melissa thought she was dealing with a selfish, dishonest husband. She had no idea she was actually the other woman. A strange part of me had assumed she knew. That women in situations like this always knew at least a little, or sensed there was more being hidden. But the confusion on her face had looked real. I corrected myself smoothly. "Sorry. I meant has he ever talked about separation, divorce, or ending the marriage?" She relaxed and shook her head. "He keeps saying he's just overwhelmed. That things between us got complicated." Us. I wrote the word complicated in my notes and nearly snapped the pen. When the consultation ended, she thanked me 3 different times. She said she felt better already just having someone take her seriously. She said she'd been scared she was overreacting. I told her she wasn't overreacting. That was true. I also told her I could help her. That was true too, though not in the way she understood. After she left, I locked my office door and sat there without moving. My desk looked exactly the same. The framed degrees on the wall were still straight. The legal pad in front of me was full of neat, controlled handwriting. Outside my window, downtown El Paso kept moving like nothing in my life had just split open. I opened the photos again. I forced myself to look at all of them. There was one outside a steakhouse in West El Paso. One in a hotel lobby. One blurry shot from inside a car where Robert was leaning over the center console toward her. Too close. Too intimate. Too familiar. Then I found the messages. Some were flirty. Some were casual. Some made me want to throw my phone through the glass. He had told her she made him feel understood. He had told her work was the only thing keeping him sane lately. He had told her he hated feeling pulled in different directions. Pulled in different directions. Like our marriage was just one of several equally inconvenient obligations. I should have gone home and confronted him that night. That would have been the normal response. The emotional response. The honest response. But I knew Robert too well to waste the advantage. If I confronted him too soon, he would lie. He'd cry if he thought it would work. He'd minimize everything. He'd say it wasn't serious. He'd say I was taking it too far. He'd somehow twist himself into the wounded one and me into the cold, punishing wife who never understood how much pressure he was under. He had done smaller versions of that before. Not with cheating, at least not that I knew then. But with money. With promises. With every conversation where the facts somehow shifted just enough to protect him. So I stayed in my office until after dark and started making a list. Everything Melissa had already given me. Everything I could confirm independently. Everything I needed to check before Robert even realized he was exposed. That was the moment I stopped being just a wife who'd been humiliated. I became a lawyer again. A careful one. A patient one. And by the time I drove home that night, the shock had started hardening into something colder. Robert was already there when I walked in. He was in the kitchen, opening a bottle of wine like we were still having a normal Thursday. He looked up, smiled, and said, "Hey, rough day." I looked at him and understood something ugly about betrayal. It isn't always loud. Sometimes it's this. A familiar face. A calm voice. A man reaching for 2 glasses while another woman's messages are still open in your bag. I set my keys down and said, "Long day." He handed me a glass. I took it. And I let him kiss my cheek. That night should have been the end of it. That's what most people would do, right? Walk in, throw the glass against the wall, demand answers, tear everything apart while it's still raw and loud and impossible to ignore. I didn't. I sat across from Robert at the kitchen island, sipping wine I couldn't taste, and listened to him talk about his day like nothing had shifted. He mentioned a meeting that ran late. A client who kept changing terms. A property deal that might finally close next week. I nodded in the right places. I even asked questions. That part still unsettles me. Not the pretending, but how easy it felt after the first few minutes. Like something in me had already separated from the situation and stepped into a different role. Observer. Strategist. Not wife. At one point he said, "I might have to go in early tomorrow. There's a showing across town." Across town. I knew exactly what that meant now. "Okay," I said, like it didn't matter. He smiled, relieved. Like I'd just made his life easier. After dinner, he went upstairs first. Shower running. Same routine. Same sounds. The kind of normal that used to feel comforting and now just felt staged. I stayed downstairs longer than I needed to, staring at nothing, replaying every photo Melissa had shown me. Every message. Every excuse he'd given me that lined up perfectly with another life I didn't even know existed. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint accounts. Not casually. Not a quick glance. Carefully. Methodically. The way I would for a client. At first, everything looked normal. Mortgage payments. Utilities. Groceries. Small, ordinary transactions that make a life look stable from the outside. Then I started filtering. Dates Melissa had mentioned. Weekends he'd been busy. Nights he came home late or not at all. That's when I saw it. Charges that didn't belong. Hotel bookings. Not frequent enough to stand out immediately, but consistent if you knew where to look. Same 2 places rotating. Always mid-range, nothing flashy. The kind of choice someone makes when they don't want attention. Restaurant bills that didn't match our schedules. Weeknights when I'd eaten alone, telling myself he was just building his career. Small transfers too. Cash pulled out in increments that wouldn't trigger suspicion. Enough to fund something. Or someone. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. This wasn't reckless cheating. This was organized. Intentional. Sustained. And suddenly, it felt different. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It wasn't just about him choosing someone else over me in moments of weakness. He had built a system. A routine. A separate life that fit neatly alongside ours without disturbing it too much. That realization didn't break me. It steadied me. Because systems can be tracked. And anything that can be tracked can be used. I pulled out a notebook and started writing. Dates. Locations. Amounts. Patterns. I cross-referenced Melissa's screenshots with our bank statements. Matched timestamps with transactions. Built a timeline that showed exactly when his 2 lives overlapped. It was almost too clean. That should have made me hesitate. Instead, it made me more certain. Upstairs, the shower turned off. I heard footsteps moving across the bedroom. Drawers opening. Closet doors sliding. I closed the laptop, wiped the screen with my sleeve out of habit, and walked upstairs like nothing had happened. He was already in bed when I got there, scrolling through his phone. I watched him for a second longer than I should have. The same man who had sent, "I miss you already," to another woman hours before telling me he was exhausted. The same man who would probably text her again after I fell asleep. He glanced up and smiled. "You coming to bed?" "Yeah," I said. I set my phone on the nightstand and lay down beside him. The distance between us felt different. Not physical. Something else. Like we were already separated and just hadn't moved out yet. He reached for me automatically, hand resting on my arm. I didn't pull away. I didn't lean in either. I just stayed still. At some point, he fell asleep. I could tell by the rhythm of his breathing, the way his hand loosened slightly where it rested against me. I waited. 10 minutes. Maybe 15. Then I moved slowly, carefully, and reached for his phone. I already knew the passcode. That part almost made me laugh. For months, he'd been guarding it like it mattered, angling the screen away from me, taking it into the bathroom with him, turning it face down on the table. But the code hadn't changed. Same 4 digits he'd always used. I unlocked it on the first try. His messages were exactly where I expected them to be. Melissa's name wasn't saved under anything clever. No fake contacts. No disguise. Just her name. That told me something too. He didn't think I was looking. Or he didn't think I'd ever find anything even if I did. I opened the thread. The most recent message was from him. "Wish you were here tonight." Timestamp, 43 minutes ago. I was lying right next to him when he sent that. I read further up. Plans. Jokes. Complaints about work. Compliments that used to belong to me. At one point she'd sent a photo of herself in a dress, asking, "Too much for dinner?" He replied, "You could wear anything and it'd still be too much for me to handle." I stared at that line longer than I should have. Not because it was good. Because I remembered when he used to talk like that to me. I kept scrolling. Then I found something that made me stop. A message from her a few days earlier. "Do you think your wife suspects anything?" My grip on the phone tightened. His reply came seconds later. "No. She trusts me." I looked over at him, asleep beside me. Completely relaxed. Completely certain. And for the first time that night, I felt something sharp cut through the cold control I'd been holding onto. Not anger exactly. Something more precise. He had already decided who I was in this situation. Predictable. Passive. Safe. Someone who wouldn't see it. Someone who wouldn't act even if she did. I placed the phone back exactly where I found it and lay there staring at the ceiling. He trusts me. The words echoed in my head, but not the way he meant them. Trust, to him, meant I wouldn't disrupt his life. That I'd stay in my place. That I wouldn't become a problem. I turned my head slightly and looked at him again. For the first time since Melissa walked into my office, I felt completely clear. Not emotional. Not overwhelmed. Focused. If that's who he thought I was, then he hadn't been paying attention at all. Because what he didn't understand yet was this. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to beg for the truth. And I definitely wasn't going to let him control how this ended. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to think. About everything I had. Everything I could prove. Everything I could build from it. And somewhere between those thoughts, the plans started forming. Quiet. Simple. And devastating. By the next morning, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. Robert left early like he said he would. He kissed my cheek on his way out, told me not to work too late, and grabbed his keys like nothing had changed. I stood in the kitchen, coffee in hand, and listened to the front door close. The second his car pulled out, I went upstairs and opened my laptop. No hesitation this time. I already had enough to prove he was cheating. That part wasn't the problem anymore. The problem was making sure that when everything came down, he wouldn't be able to walk away clean. And for that, I needed more than messages and hotel receipts. I needed structure. I started with our finances again. This time deeper. I pulled full statements, not just summaries. Exported everything into spreadsheets. Categorized transactions. Marked anything tied to the timeline Melissa had given me. Patterns became clearer the longer I looked. The same 2 hotels. Alternating weeks. Always booked under his name, never prepaid, always charged to the same account. Restaurants clustered around those same days. Small cash withdrawals within hours of each meeting. It wasn't random. It was routine. And routines are easy to break open once you see them. I saved everything. Backed it up. Then I moved to something I should have checked a long time ago. Property records. Robert worked in real estate. That meant deals, commissions, side arrangements, partnerships. Things that could get messy if someone wasn't paying attention. I searched his recent transactions. Most of them were normal. Standard listings. Commercial leases. Small residential flips. Then one stood out. A property purchase tied to an LLC I didn't recognize. I clicked into it. The registered address was a P.O. box. The managing member wasn't listed under Robert's name, but I recognized the structure. I'd seen clients try to hide assets like this before. Shell ownership, indirect control. I dug a little further. The LLC traced back to a business filing connected to a second name. Not his. Hers. Melissa Wilson. I stared at the screen, reading it twice just to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting it. They weren't just sleeping together. They were financially linked. That changed everything. This wasn't just an affair that would burn out eventually. This was something he was investing in, building, protecting, maybe even planning for. I leaned back in my chair and let that settle. Because now I understood something I hadn't fully grasped the night before. He wasn't just lying to me. He was preparing a future that didn't include me. And suddenly, all the quiet control I'd been holding onto sharpened into something much more focused. If he was building something behind my back, then I needed to make sure he couldn't keep it. I spent the rest of the morning working on Melissa's case like nothing had changed. Because technically, nothing had. She still needed representation. She still deserved to know the truth about her marriage. She still deserved to walk away protected. When she came in that afternoon, she looked slightly calmer than the day before. Still anxious, but steadier. Like having a plan had given her something to hold on to. We sat across from each other again. Same desk. Same chairs. Completely different reality. I pulled some more records, she said, sliding over additional screenshots. I don't know if this helps. I looked through them carefully. It helped. More timestamps. More confirmations. More overlap. I asked her questions. Clarified details. Filled in gaps. At one point I said, have you ever heard of an LLC connected to him? Anything business related that didn't quite make sense. She frowned. Not really. He keeps his work pretty separate. Why? I held her gaze for a second, then shook my head slightly. Just covering all angles. That wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the full truth. Because if she didn't know about the financial connection, that meant Robert hadn't told her everything either. He was managing two versions of the same life. And neither of us had the full picture. That almost made me laugh. After she left, I finalized the next step. Filing. Timing mattered. If I filed Melissa's case first, it would catch him off guard. Force him into defense mode. Expose the affair before he had time to control the narrative. Then I could file mine immediately after, using everything already documented. 2 cases. Same evidence. No room to maneuver. I called Mark Anderson, the process server I trusted most for sensitive cases. I need someone served at his office, I told him. Discreet, but fast. He didn't ask questions. Just said, send me the details. I did. Name, Robert Smith. Location, his office downtown. I attached everything needed for Melissa's filing. Then I sat there for a moment, staring at the confirmation email after it went through. That was it. There was no going back from that point. No quiet conversations. No private confrontations. No chance for him to spin things before they became real. It was in motion. That night, Robert came home like always. Same routine. Same casual tone. Long day, he asked, loosening his tie. Yeah, I said. A lot to deal with. That part, at least, was honest. He talked through dinner again. Work. Deals. Plans. Things that suddenly felt irrelevant. I watched him the entire time, but not in the way I had the night before. Before, I was trying to understand. Now, I already did. At one point, he reached for his phone and smiled slightly at something on the screen. I didn't need to ask who it was. I just said, you seem busy lately. He glanced up. Yeah, just a lot going on. Work. Mostly. I nodded like that answer made sense. Because technically, it did. Just not the way he thought. After dinner, he went upstairs earlier than usual. Said he had emails to catch up on. I stayed downstairs, sitting in the same spot, hands folded in front of me. Waiting. It didn't take long. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. His name lit up the screen. Robert Smith. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Hello. His voice wasn't calm this time. What is this? He asked, sharp, confused, already starting to crack. Why is there a divorce filing with my name on it? I leaned back slightly in my chair. There it was. The moment everything shifted from quiet to real. I let a few seconds pass before I spoke. Because you've been having an affair, I said. For months. Maybe longer. Silence. Then, what are you talking about? I closed my eyes briefly, not because I needed to, but because I already knew how this would go. Denial first. Then minimization. Then blame. I've seen everything, I said. The messages. The photos. The transactions. His breathing changed on the other end. Faster. Less controlled. It's not, he started. It's not serious. It just happened. Of course it did. Things like this always just happen, according to the people doing them. I almost smiled. Then I said the one thing I knew he wouldn't be ready for. I'm her lawyer. The silence that followed was different. Not confusion. Not denial. Understanding. Slow. Heavy. Final. And for the first time since this started, I knew he realized he had already lost. For a second, he didn't say anything. I could hear it though. The shift. The moment everything he thought he had under control slipped out of his hands. What? He said finally, like the words didn't make sense yet. I'm her lawyer, I repeated, calm. I've been building her case for weeks. That's not Jessica, that's not even legal. It is, I cut in. There's no conflict she's aware of. And you never gave me a reason to recuse myself. That part wasn't entirely clean. I knew that. But I also knew how far I could push it before anyone questioned it. He exhaled hard. I could almost picture him running a hand through his hair, pacing his office, trying to catch up to a situation he hadn't even realized existed. You set me up, he said. That word almost made me laugh. No, I said quietly. You did that yourself. Another silence. Longer this time. Then he tried a different approach. Softer. Controlled. The version of him that usually worked on people who didn't know him well enough. Jessica, listen. Whatever you think this is, it's not like that. I leaned back in my chair, staring at nothing. Then explain it, I said. He hesitated. Of course he did. Because there was no explanation that didn't make him exactly what he was. It got complicated, he said finally. Work's been insane, you've been distant, and she just understood what I was dealing with. There it was. Not an apology. A justification. I let that sit for a second. Then I said, you told her you were overwhelmed. That things were complicated. His breath caught. I didn't need to see his face to know that landed. You read my messages, he asked. I read enough. Another pause. Then, quieter, almost careful, does she know? I looked down at the table in front of me. No, I said. She doesn't. Then don't tell her, he said quickly. Too quickly. There's no reason to make this worse than it already is. That was the moment everything became completely clear. Not when I saw the photo. Not when I read the messages. Now. Because even here, even after everything had been exposed, his first instinct wasn't to take responsibility. It was to manage the situation. Control the damage. Protect himself. She deserves the truth, I said. So do you, he shot back. You think this is black and white? You think you've been perfect? I almost smiled at that. There it was. Blame. Predictable. Reliable. Exactly where I knew he'd go. I'm not the one who built a second life, I said. That's not what this is, he said, sharper now. You're blowing it out of proportion. Am I? You're taking one mistake and turning it into one mistake. I cut in. My voice didn't rise, but something in it must have changed, because he stopped talking. I didn't need to list the hotels. The messages. The money. We both knew. This isn't a conversation, I said after a second. Her case is already filed. You've been served. Mine goes in tomorrow. You're really doing this, he said, like he still couldn't believe it. I already did. Another silence. This one heavier. Final. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The control was gone. You're going to regret this, he said. I let out a small breath. No, I said. I'm not. And then I hung up. The next few weeks were exactly what I expected. Messy, but controlled. Robert tried to fight it first. Not directly about the affair. That would have been pointless with the evidence already in place, but about everything around it. Finances. Assets. Timing. He tried to slow things down, complicate filings, push for negotiations that would give him room to recover something. It didn't work. Because every move he made, I had already anticipated. Melissa's case went through first. Clean. Direct. Supported by documentation he couldn't dispute without exposing himself further. The court didn't need drama. Just facts. And the facts were clear. He had been unfaithful. He had used shared marital funds in ways that violated their agreement. He had misrepresented financial activity. She walked away with more than she expected. Stability. Closure. A clean break. She cried when everything finalized. Not in my office. In the hallway outside the courtroom. Quiet, controlled, but real. She hugged me and said, "Thank you. I don't think I could have done this without you." I nodded. I told her she did the hard part. That was true. I just didn't tell her everything. My case followed right behind hers. Same structure. Same evidence. Same timeline. Robert didn't have much left to argue. By then, his position was already weakened. Financially, legally, and reputationally. 2 divorce cases tied to the same behavior tend to do that. He stopped trying to negotiate halfway through. Not because he accepted it. Because he realized there wasn't a version of this where he came out ahead. In the end, I kept the house. Most of the remaining assets. And something that mattered more than I expected. Control over how the story ended. He moved out quietly. No big confrontation. No dramatic goodbye. Just boxes. Silence. And a door closing one last time. The house felt different after that. Not empty. Just still. For the first few nights, I noticed every sound. The absence of his routines. The way the space didn't shift around someone else's presence anymore. Then, slowly, it started to feel like mine again. Completely mine. Melissa sent me a message a few weeks after everything was finalized. Just a simple thank you again. Said she was starting over. New apartment. New routine. Trying to figure out what life looked like without him in it. I stared at that message for a long time. There were a dozen ways I could have responded. I could have told her the truth. That I wasn't just her lawyer. That I had been sitting across from her knowing the entire time. That we had been tied together long before she ever walked into my office. I didn't. I told her I was glad she was doing okay. That she deserved better. And that moving forward would get easier. Then I put my phone down and let that be the end of it. Sometimes I still think about telling her. About what she'd say. Whether she'd feel betrayed or relieved or something in between. But the truth is, telling her now wouldn't change anything that already happened. It would just reopen something she's finally starting to move past. And maybe that's selfish. Or maybe it's the only part of this where I chose not to push things further than they needed to go. It's been almost a year now. The house is quiet in a way that doesn't feel heavy anymore. Work is steady. Predictable. Clean. And I don't check the clock wondering where someone is or whether I'm being lied to. I just exist. On my own terms. Sometimes I think about the version of me who would have reacted immediately. Who would have confronted him the second she saw that photo? Who would have chosen emotion over control? Maybe that version would have felt more honest. Maybe she would have walked away sooner. Or maybe she would have ended up with less. I don't know. What I do know is this. He thought I would never see it. And even if I did, he thought I wouldn't do anything about it. He trusted me to stay exactly where he left me. And that's the part that still stays with me. Not the affair. Not the lies. That? So I guess this is where I leave it. I helped another woman take down her husband, while taking down my own at the same time. She never knew. He never saw it coming. And in the end, I walked away with everything that mattered. So, was what I did wrong, or was it the only way to make sure neither of us ended up losing more than we already had?